just a few ideas before we get to the actual Seder plate that I have here in front of you and the Haggadah itself. But in general, Passover, the festival of Passover, is based on one single idea. The most powerful idea and the most essential idea of Passover is that we are not just celebrating the grand exodus of Jews some 2,000 years ago from Egypt, but we're celebrating the grand exodus of Jews and of ourselves today, right now. That is why the word for Egypt is the same word as the word for Mitzrayim, which means limits. Because what we are actually supposed to do each and every Passover is to think of limits that limit us in lives, whether it's psychological limits, emotional limits, spiritual limits, you name it. And you come out of them during Passover. You free yourselves from that Egypt, from that Mitzrayim. That's why I recommend, I do it myself, for myself, but that's why I also recommend that everyone, before Passover, writes down a list maybe of 4, 5, 6, 10 limits that they have in life, whether it's bad habits, relationships that are broken, that need to be fixed, and the brokenness of the relationship is strangling people, whether it's spiritual limits, maybe you want to take upon yourself a new mitzvah, whatever it may be. Again, write down those limits, those mitzvahs that you may have before Passover, and then during Passover, particularly during the Seder, try to focus on those limits and try to focus on ways that you can truly come out of those mitzrayim, of those mitzvahs, and break out of them and truly free yourself, because that is the essential idea of Passover. By the way, it's an idea that repeats itself time and time again in the Haggadah, in many of the symbols that we have for Passover. But that's the main idea, and that's why, again, I warmly recommend, I do it myself, but I warmly recommend that you prepare that list. Think of limits that you can break this year, that you can free yourselves from this year, and then I promise your Passover will be experienced on a whole different level. I will mention that this is also why, speaking of Hebrew words, then we'll get to the Seder plate and to the Seder itself, but this is also why, think about this, the word for freedom in Hebrew is chofesh. Now, it's interesting, again, the word chofesh does not just mean freedom, it also means something else, like many other Hebrew words. Chofesh comes from the word chapes, which means to search. Why? Because you can only be free if you search within yourself. If you search within yourself what those limits are, if you search within yourself what your true definition is, what your divine soul yearns for, and if you unleash that after you've done that searching, then you can truly be free. That's, again, the big idea of Passover, to pass over our limits, to break those Egypts, those Mitzrayim, by searching within ourselves and allowing our divine soul to finally be set free. That's the big idea on what the Seder, everything about Passover is based on. Speaking about searching, I want to go step by step. Again, this is a model Seder, but the Seder actually begins the day before Passover. So I want to take you through the step-by-step journey of coming out of our own limitations with the custom that we do even before the Seder begins. What's the custom that we do the day before? We search our homes for chametz, for any type of leavened bread or cake. And we do so, some of you may have this kit right here at home, or you don't have to have this specific kit, but it can just include maybe a spoon to assemble the chametz that you may find, the crumbs, then a candle to search within the cracks of your walls and of your rooms for chametz, and a feather to assemble all of the chametz, to kind of brush and broom the chametz. Again, it could be any spoon, any candle, and any feather. It doesn't have to have this special kit. But we do this the night before Passover. This year it will be Tuesday night, right? Passover begins Wednesday night. So Tuesday night in 6 days, we'll be searching our homes for chametz. What happens thereafter is that once we find all of this chametz, then the next morning, we burn this chametz along with these 3 items. Now, there's a deep idea here that I want to share with you. We understand why the spoon must be burnt. After all, it touched the chametz, the bread, so it can be contaminated with it. The feather, same story. It touched the chametz, it could be contaminated with it. The candle, though, did not touch the chametz, why burn it? The candle stays away from the chametz. Why throw this into the fire when we are burning our chametz the next morning? That's the big question. And the answer is very powerful, and it speaks also about our ability to become free. The answer is we burn that candle because what did we use this candle for? To search for chametz. In other words, to search for negativity. Those are not the types of candles we want in our lives. If our eyes, if our light is used in order to just search for negativity, to look at the bad in others and in places and in opportunities, that's not the eyesight we want in Judaism. So we burn that, we throw that away, because you can't really say hello freedom if you haven't said goodbye negativity. It doesn't work like that. In order to be free, you need to be positive. You need to be happy. And I think it's a very powerful lesson, not just for Passover, but also for our COVID-19 era, because yes, we can focus on all of the negativities, all of the dire predictions on all of the bad that is coming from this terrible disease, and indeed God should eradicate it from our lives. But there is also many good. There's a lot of blessings in this COVID-19 era. The fact that we are able to pause life for a second and truly focus on that which is really important in life, our families, our value system, that's something that we ought to focus on. That's the pair of eyes that Judaism wants from us. Not that candle that searches for chametz, the candle that searches for good, even within the worst of circumstances in life. So that's where really Passover begins. You can't say goodbye to your limitations if you haven't changed your whole shift. You haven't your whole consciousness, your whole eyesight. You just can't be free if you don't have an optimistic, positive eyesight on life. All right, let's go now to the Seder plate, because that's what we have in front of us. As soon as we begin our Seder, even before we say Kaddish, we do the first Kiddush, the first of the 4 cups of wine. We are staring at a Seder plate that should be prepared, of course, for the Seder, even before we begin the Seder. So the Seder plate has multiple items. I'm going to go one by one without any specific preference to the order. Item number 1 is what I do not have on the Seder plate, but I do have a picture, and that's the shank bone, the zerah. The zerah is placed on a Seder plate to remind us of the Paschal lamb, of the sacrifice that was brought right at the very beginning. During the first Passover, a Paschal lamb was brought to follow God's direction, to bring a Paschal lamb. Now, why a Paschal lamb? Why a shank bone? And that is because the shank bone really is completely roasted. And there's a deep mystical idea behind this. In order to be free, we too need to take our bodies that can be cold pieces of meat, sometimes cold, dry, uninterested, as dull as could be, and we have to fill them with fire. We have to roast these bodies. How do we do that? With the soul. King Solomon compares the soul to the candle of God. That's why we light candles for yahrzeits, because the soul never dies. The soul is forever with us. And during the yahrzeit, we feel that the most. And therefore, we light a candle to remind us of the soul that's still with us. So that soul, that piece of fire, that candle of God needs to come into its own, needs to express itself for us to be free. We can't just ask the question of what our body wants. In order to be free, we have to ask the question of what our soul wants. That's represented by the zerah. It doesn't just remind us of the Paschal lamb again, but it reminds us of our duty to take our piece of meat right here and burn it with God's fire, roast it all the way. Another reason we use the zerah we place the zerah on the Seder plate, the zerah in Hebrew means the outstretched arm, and it reminds us of how God took us out of Egypt with his outstretched arm, his zoa netuya, as it says, with his powerful arm. That's how he took the Jewish people out of Egypt. So it reminds us of that too. That's item number 1 on the Seder plate. Item number 2 on the Seder plate is the egg, which is usually at the opposite of the zerah. This egg right here, this boiled egg, this egg reminds us of yet another sacrifice, the sacrifice of Chagigah, that was also brought in the temple. not just on Passover, but every festival. Chagiga means chag, means festival. So we had to thank God for the festival and rejoice with God during the festival. So we brought korban chagiga, which is what this egg reminds us of. But there's another deep symbolic meaning to this egg. Eggs, as you all know, are full of life. On the outside, it may seem completely dry and hard, but on the inside, there's a lot of life. And it reminds us of ourselves. As we stand to be free, we have to know, yes, we have this piece of meat like we spoke about with the zerah. We have this dry shell to us. But let us not forget that there's so much life, even within the people that we've given up on. Even within ourselves, that sometimes we've given up on. We have to know that God has given us life. In fact, every morning we wake up and we thank God just for that, for restoring a soul in us, our lives in us. Some people, God forbid, do not wake up in the morning. God gave us life. And to be free means that we have to completely believe in the life within us, even if we do not see it, like this egg. And then afterwards, use it and unleash it to the best of our ability. That's what this egg also represents. All right, next item. Let's go to the maror. The maror. Now, the maror is bitter herbs. Some use lettuce. I don't know how bitter that is. Some use horseradish right here. So I have both items. Some use onions. Some use garlic. Whatever is bitter to you, you can use it. You can even use jalapeno peppers if you want. But whatever is better to you, that's what you should use. Or whatever is your custom, of course. Our family custom is to use lettuce, so we use lettuce. But the bitter herbs remind us not just of the bitterness of the slavery during our 210 years in Egypt, 210 years of bitter slavery. But the maror also reminds us of another Hebrew word. That's why the Hebrew language is so rich. Maror also alludes to one of the spices, the 11 spices that were in the temple, that were called mor. Mor is a delicious spice. The maror reminds us that yes, life can be bitter, but within that bitterness, there's also a mor. There's a delicious spice. And that's why we embrace bitterness. You may think, well, Judaism now is all into bitterness. Are we really that negative? Are we really that kvetchy and krechzi? No. We are not. The only reason we are embracing this bitterness is because this is a reminder that within every bitterness, there's sweetness, there's a more. And we dare not shy away from bitter moments in life, not react like the psychological reaction of fight or flight, but rather embrace the bitterness. Within every bitterness, there's great joy, there's great more, there's great opportunity. You know, it reminds me of, I mentioned this before, but of the Stradivarius violin that was made out of broken logs of gondolas in Venice. Now, the Stradivarius violin produces the sweetest sound in music, but it's made out of broken logs. I think it's like life itself. When we learn to embrace the broken logs of life, then we can produce the sweetest music. And I think it's true. Think about it yourselves. I mean, it's an exercise for Passover. A lot of meditations on Passover. This is one meditation. Think of the moments in life in which you grew the most. And I am willing to bet, even though not a lot of bet in Judaism, so to bet on zero money, but I'm willing to bet that those moments that made you grow the most were bitter moments in your life, were moments of challenge, were moments of hardships. But that's because you were able to embrace them and say, you know what, maybe I have to change something. And I think, again, this is very much connected to our COVID-19 era. It thrust upon us this tremendous change in our own lives. We've had to adjust in so many ways. But we ought to ask ourselves, well, maybe this adjustment was needed. Maybe I had to change this thing or that thing in life. Let's embrace this bitterness and find within it the more, which is exactly what this maror stands for. And in fact, by the way, the Jewish people have embraced the slavery in many ways, but to the point that God tells us, just an example that comes to mind. In the Torah, he tells us, Bi v'ahavtem et hager. You should love the stranger. Why? Ki gerim haytem be'eretz Mitzrayim. Because you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. Remember that. Don't flee away from that experience. Remember that experience and remember the more that it taught you. You were strangers. You were embraced. Maybe not in the best of ways, but you still embraced. No one kicked you out of the country. So you should embrace the stranger because you know exactly how it feels to be a stranger, and that will enable you to love the stranger even more. That's one way we can embrace this. That's the maror. Next item on the Seder plate is the karpas. Now the karpas, some use, again, depends on your custom. Some use celery, like this right here. Some use potatoes. Some use carrots. Some use parsley. But depends again on your family custom. Now, why do we have the karpas on a Seder plate? The basic answer is because if you take the word karpas in Hebrew and mix the letters around, you can spell the word parech samech. Parech refers to the labor, the slavery of the Jewish people in Egypt. That's the word, by the way, that is used by the Torah itself. When Pharaoh commanded this labor upon the Jewish nation, the Torah uses the word parech. Parech samech. Again, those are the letters of the word karpas. Parech samech. Labor samech. What does samech stand for? Samech has a numerical value of 60. And it refers to the 600,000, if you add a few more zeros, 600,000 Jews who were in Egypt under slavery. So it reminds us again of the slavery in Egypt. Now, what's interesting is that we dip this karpas, and that's throughout the Haggadah dinner. We'll take the karpas from our Seder plate and we'll dip it into salt water, like this. And then we'll eat it during the karpas segment of our Seder. By the way, the salt water is pink because my wife is big into Himalayan salt. Apparently it's healthier, so that's why. But you can use any salt, kosher salt, regular salt, it doesn't matter. You dip it into salt water. Now, why do you dip it into salt water? To remind us, as they will tell you, of the tears of the Jewish people in Egypt as they were being enslaved. But there's a deeper reason, and again, it connects to this ability to find a more within the maror. What is special about salt? Salt, think about this, as opposed to all other spices, is the only spice, or the only type of spice that does not change the flavor of the food. Quite the opposite, it enhances it, right? That's why some people put salt on their watermelon. I know Japanese do that, to enhance the flavor of the watermelon. Now, that's what's special about salt. Why do we dip the karpas into salt water? To remind us that, again, there might be a maror experience on the outside, but let's take the salt and enhance what's on the inside. Let's focus on the neshama, on the soul, on the light within the darkness, on the holiness within the bitterness. That's what the salt water reminds us. Again, it's an exercise of chofesh, of chapes, like we said at the beginning, of searching within ourselves. If you are not happy in life, then maybe the best therapy is to continue to search and search and search within yourself. Look at what is positive. Look at what is divine and develop those aspects of yours, and then you'll be happy. Go and dip yourself into salt water. That's the big idea. I think you're also allowed to go to the sea. Maybe that's also a reminder of connecting to our deeper self, of having that salt enhance us rather than debilitate us. The last item on the Seder plate is the charoset right here. The charoset is a combination of, again, depends on your family tradition, but usually dates, walnuts, apples, other types of nuts. So I have a combination of all of them. Wine, people add grapes or wine into the charoset. But the point is to make a mixture of food that reminds us of the bricks, of the cement from which bricks are made. Because the main task of the Jewish people in Egypt was to build bricks, was to build cement, was to build those pyramids. So again, we are reminded of the slavery in the desert, in Egypt, and the cement that they built. That is what the charoset reminds us, and we connect to the story. But it's interesting to note again, the same thing, that the charoset is sweet. Many people, I don't know about you, but many people love to eat the charoset. and want more and more and more of it. Why? Because again, even within those bricks, even within that slavery, there is great sweetness. That's the big idea, not to shy away from anything that represents a slavery year, but to embrace it, because that has been the approach of Judaism forever. To embrace the sweetness even within the challenge. COVID-19 era, there's a lot of sweetness. It's a lot of terrible agony and tragedy, but there's a lot of sweetness too. And we can't shy away from the whole thing altogether, because we ought to embrace the blessings that one may find during this era too. That's what the charoset represents and those items on the Seder plate. We have this in front of us, and then we also have underneath the Seder plate, we have the matzah. Now, I know many people put the Seder plate on one end and the matzah on the other end. Really, you should have your matzahs underneath your Seder plate. Why is that? There's a Kabbalistic reason for that, and I won't go too deep. But the Seder plate is what gives. Again, it's what gives us ideas. It's what gives us all of these lessons that we spoke about. The matzah is what receives. That's why the matzah is flat, symbolizing humility. You cannot receive wisdom without being humble. So that's why we actually put the Seder plate that gives lessons above the matzah that receives. That's usually the way it works. If you want to pour for yourself a cup of water, the cup goes below and the water that you are pouring goes above. When you are receiving, you are at the bottom. When you are giving, you are at the top. So it's really to symbolize what is giving us lessons and what is enabling us, that humility of the matzah that is flat, to receive those lessons. You can only receive lessons, become wise, if you are humble like the matzah, as flat as the matzah. By the way, that is why the term for a scholar in Judaism is not a wise man. It's not a professor. It's not a someone with titles before or after his name. No, the term for a scholar in Judaism is Talmid Chacham, which means the student of wisdom. You're always a student of wisdom. You're always like the matzah. If you think that you've achieved wisdom and that's it, you're the Einstein of the world, then you're actually the dumbest, according to Judaism. In order to grow in wisdom, you have to constantly be a student of wisdom, a Talmid Chacham. Or as my dear rabbi often says, Rabbi Steinsaltz, if you think you've arrived, you're lost. That's why the matzah is at the bottom. But in any case, you have three matzahs here at the bottom. You have Shemura matzah, and by the way, I encourage everyone to use Shemura matzah, because that's the matzah that they ate when they came out of Egypt. They didn't have machines in Egypt to make for themselves matzah. So try to get for yourselves Shemura matzah. By the way, it's also handmade, and the people who made it had in mind to make it for the Seder throughout the entire process. Machines, as of 2020, I don't think have a mind of their own. So they can't have their intention as they're making the matzah. So it's better to use the Shemura matzah. If you don't have Shemura matzah, a little plug in here, we're selling them at CBT for cost. So you can place your orders, but you have three Shemura matzahs. The reason we have three matzahs underneath the Seder plate, right here as you see them, is because they represent the three categories of Jews. As you know, there are three categories. There's the Kohen, there's the Levi, the Levite, and there's the Israel. Some of you I know here are Kohens. I can see some of you. And I know that there are Kohens among us. Levites, let's see. I think we have Levites. Yes, we have Levites among us too. And we have Israel, simple people like me among us. So the matzahs really represent here yet another aspect that we haven't touched upon. And that is that in order to truly be free, one needs to have unity. One needs to have this complete fulfillment of loving your fellow as yourself. If you are in tension with others, you can be free, because those grudges, those feelings and sentiments of hatred maybe will imprison you, will imprison your soul. To be free, you need to be as united as these three matzahs are, all together, all the Jewish people together, the three categories together. That's why one of the things that you should put on that list that we spoke about I would encourage is maybe there's a relationship that's pulling you down. Maybe it's time to reach out and to enable the flow of the relationship to be a flow of positive vibes, of good energy, as they say, instead of negative vibes and bad energy. But you cannot be completely free if you don't have and if you don't embody the attribute of unity. Cohen, Levi, and Yisrael. Those are the three matzahs underneath the Seder plate. All right. Now that we've spoken about the items on the Seder plate, the three matzahs, and of course, the major ideas of Passover coming out of our own Mitzrayim, of our own limits, and also this ability to throw away the negative eyesight and burn that candle, I want to turn to the Haggadah itself. By the way, I chose this as my Haggadah holder. I want you to know I was gifted this. I don't know if many of you can see this, but this is a beautiful rose that's created by JNF. And someone gifted this to me. And I keep it here in my office because it really symbolizes everything that we spoke about. How this rose was made, as you can maybe hear, by this steel. This steel came from bombs that were launched from terrorists in Gaza to innocent Israelis. Now, what Israelis decided to do is to turn these bombs into symbols of hope, symbols of love. And they made roses out of them. They made mezuzahs out of them. They made menorahs out of them. Again, symbolizing that don't shy away from your bitterness in life and your maror, because you can make more out of them. You can make sweetness out of them. But in any case, so that's the rose right here. But the Haggadah. So the Haggadah, I'm not going to go, we will be here for hours if I do this. But I'm not going to go into every aspect of the Haggadah. But first, a short introduction. So the Haggadah itself is divided into 15 steps. Why 15? There's a Kabbalistic reason for that. And that is because number 15 really has the letter value of Yud and Hey. Yud and Hey, those two letters in Hebrew, have the numerical value of 15. Yud and Hey in Hebrew spell out the word Yah, which is one of the words for God. In fact, it says that God used that name, the name Yud and Hey, to create the world. Ki v'yah Hashem tzur olamim. And on Passover, what we are trying to do is to recreate our world. We're setting ourselves free, remember. So we have to almost recreate our world. And how do we do so? By recreating our world through divinity, through Yah, with a partnership with God. When we partner with God, when we unify with Him, when we allow our divine souls to really be set free, then we are free. So those 15 steps, the Yud, Hey steps, remind us of our duty tonight. I mean, not tonight, we're a few days before Passover, but on Passover, to connect to our souls, let that Yah rebuild our own world. The 15 steps begin with the Kaddish, with the Kiddush right here, okay? I'm not gonna drink wine now. Might not be able to finish the class if I do, but some use Manischewitz, they're old, and they're delicious, of course, wine in America, Barkan, Herzog, Carmel. I'm not going to advocate for one company over another. I'll get in trouble, but preferably I will say you should use red wine. If you can't use wine, then grape juice. Now, why red? Red wine or red grape juice, again, if you can't use wine, because it reminds us again of the blood that was spilled in Egypt. The blood that was spilled by having all these baby boys drowned, by having all these slaves tortured to death. It reminds us of that blood. Now again, we take this and we elevate it. We elevate our Kiddush cup and we drink it, bringing us much joy. Nichnas yain yotzeh sod. The Talmud says that when we drink wine, great secrets, joyful secrets come out. And that is, again, sharing with us that same lesson that we've been repeating time and time again, that within every bitterness, there's great sweetness. It's up to us to embrace that bitterness, analyze it sometimes, maybe more than others, and find that sweetness because it's there for that reason specifically. So we drink Kiddush. Now, Kiddush in Hebrew means not just this, drinking a cup of wine, but it means to separate. That's why, by the way, under the chuppah, we say to the bride, the groom say to their brides, Arei at mekudeshet. You are, again, the word mekudeshet, kadesh, same word. Mekudeshet to me. You are mekudeshet to me. What does that mean? Does not just mean that you are sanctified to me, but you are separated. We are separated right now from all other women. You are just for me, I am just for you. That we are creating for ourselves this entity that is separated from every other human being in the world. That's what Kadesh means. What's the first step of freedom? And that's why this is the first of the 15 steps. To separate ourselves from who we were a moment ago. To say to ourselves that the past is indeed the past. Right now, I'm a different human. God recreates every moment. I have to be able to let go of the past and embrace the new person that I am right now in order to be free. If you're still carrying a baggage, you won't be able to be free during the Passover night or at any moment in life. You have to say to the past, goodbye, and embrace the present. That is why, by the way, speaking of the Passover story, but Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, explained why the Jewish people were asked to walk into the homes of the Egyptians just before the Grand Exodus and take whatever they want. V'nitzaltem et Mitzrayim, the verse tells us. Go and plunder the Egyptians, God commanded the Jewish people to do. Why? Was God teaching them to rob, to become thieves? Go in the homes of the Egyptians and steal, take whatever you want? What does this mean? But Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook, again, the first chief rabbi of Israel, teaches no. That's because God understood that if they left without taking anything from the Egyptians, they will forever carry a grudge against the Egyptians, saying, look, they tortured us. They never paid us back. By going into the homes of the Egyptians and taking what we think we deserve, then we were able to let go of that grudge and say to ourselves, you know what? Yes, we were slaves for 210 years. We didn't get a penny for that. All we got was torture. Now, at least, they paid us back. Now we can become free. You cannot become free again if you haven't said goodbye hatred, goodbye grudges. Yeah. So that's why we do Kadesh as the first step, to separate ourselves from any negativity of the past or any past altogether. Embrace the new person I am today. By the way, I really believe, and please feel free to disagree with me, but on a different note, I think that's why God created sleep. I mean, why? I always bemoan this. You could be much more productive if you don't need a sleep. Why did God create sleep? And in a way, I think God created sleep as a reboot button, as a reset button, because he wanted us to be able to reset our day and start the next day fresh and new. If we are still lingering with all of the problems of the past days, we can't start the next day fresh and new. So he created sleep to reset us. I think that's what we need. Kadesh, separate yourselves, reset yourselves, and then become free. That's the first step. The second step is urchatz. Urchatz means to wash your hands. And that is when we actually go and wash our hands without saying the Al Netilat Yadayim that is usually recited when we wash our hands. We wash our hands 3 times interchangeably, and then we go and prepare ourselves to eat the karpas that we spoke about before. Why this washing of the hands? Again, this is the second step of freedom. Second step of freedom is to wash yourself. Now that you've said goodbye, wash yourself. Again, take a shower, like you take a shower in the morning. Take a shower, start fresh, wash your eyes, wash your ears, wash your mouth, wash everything that may still be connected to negativity. Wash it off completely. And then start speaking new words, hearing new voices, smelling new odors, seeing new things, and focusing on new things. You have to wash yourself to be free. Urchatz. Then karpas, we already explained that what that was. Karpas, that is dipped into the salt water. And that is then after we've really become free, now we can focus, we've washed ourselves, right? Separate ourselves and washed ourselves. Then we can focus on what's inside, on the gift that we truly have, that divine soul. Enhance it, like salt water enhances food. After karpas, we have what's called yachatz. We take this middle matzah right here, and what we do is we try and break it. Now, we have to break it. There's a Kabbalistic way of breaking the matzah, you should know. Don't just break it like a karate ninja, but break it and try and form a vav, and a Yud. In other words, what you have to try and do is create like a Vav shape. I'm not going to break it the way you ought to break it, but let's do this. There's a kind of a Vav and a little Yud. Yud is tiny. The Hebrew letter of Yud is tiny. Why? Again, reminding us of God. The Vav and the Yud. Why these two letters? So Kabbalists explain that the Yud really represents God up there. And then the Vav represents our duty to draw down. That's why the Vav is long. To draw down the Yud that's up there, down to us. So imagine the Vav now is pulling the Yud to us, to our lives. That's why the Vav and the Yud and the Yachatz. Because again, the fourth step of freedom is not just to separate ourselves from the past, wash ourselves, and then go inward with the salt that's enhancing us. But also then as you go inward, make sure you connect this to the Yud up there. Draw it down. Connect to God. Give it up to the higher power, as they say in the 12-step program. Make sure that you are exhibiting complete emunah, complete faith. Draw down that Yud. That's the Yachatz. Once we've done that, then we become vessels of godliness. And as vessels of godliness, then it is our duty to magid, to approach the next step, which is to tell the story to our children and to ourselves. I will say this, it's interesting to note that the magid, if you look at any Haggadah, the magid begins with a very bizarre phrase, Kol dichfin yeteh ve'yechol, we say. May all those who desire come and eat. Now let me ask you, are you that stingy to say that sentence at that moment? Had you already started your meal? Now you're going to invite everybody? You should invite everyone before you start the meal, a few days before. Make some phone calls, make some emails, not this week, not this year, unfortunately, because of the COVID-19. But in general, now you're going to invite people, you already started the meal. But the answer is deeper. Yes, you have to invite people, and we trust you that you did that a few days before. What do you do then on Magid when you're ready to tell the story after becoming a divine vessel? You have to invite yourself. That sentence is recited to you. Invite every part of yourself to the Egypt story, to the Exodus story, to the freedom story. Because if you forget one part of yourself, there'll always be a part that is enslaved. You won't be completely free. So invite your emotional part, your psychological part, your spiritual part, your physical part, your whatever part. Every single part must be invited to the Seder. That's what this called dichfin sentence really means. Another idea about Magid that I want to share with you is, interestingly, the number 4 takes the center stage, right? So you have 4 sons, you have 4 cups of wine, you have 4 questions. Why the number 4? So many say that's because it relates to the 4 languages of redemption that God used in order to free us from Egypt. 4 languages of redemption. But there is another big idea to the number 4. What is what is the letter that represents the numerical value of 4 in Hebrew? This comes directly from Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, a brilliant thought. The letter that represents the number 4 in Hebrew is Dalet. Now Dalet has 2 meanings. Dalet comes from the word dal, which means impoverished, poor. It reminds us again of our vital duty to connect to the poor among us and to the poor inside of us. What is poor? Poor are people that maybe are on the sidelines of society, that maybe we've given up on, maybe we don't have faith in. Now, what does Passover really mean? What does freedom really mean? It means that we have to connect to those people again, because Passover means that we have to have faith even in those who have lost faith in themselves. We have to have faith even in those parts of us that we've lost faith in, those poor parts. So don't ever shy away again, not just from, this new vision of Passover teaches us to have faith in everybody. Why? Because there's a divine soul in everybody. If you've discovered it within yourself, when you go out to tell the story of Egypt to the world, then discover it in others too. Maybe that's what they need, a boost of faith. But there's another another symbol to this Dalet. Again, this is Kabbalistic, so it might be a little deep, and bear with me. But Dalet in Hebrew, if you look at the form of Dalet, the form of Dalet is an interesting letter. You have this bar at the very top, and then you have this other bar this way that goes this way, but it doesn't start from the end of the bar of the top. It starts somewhere after the end of the bar of the top, like this, right here. If you can see me via video. Why is that? That's because Rabbi Yitzchak Luria tells us that the number 4 must be so central during the Passover story, because it reminds us of the direction we should have in life. Most of us most of our lives, most of our minds, most of our hearts, most of our souls must be leaning forward, like the Dalet. Most of the bar is leaning forward, but you should still have a little bit of your bar that's connected to the past. What does this mean? You have to be connected to your roots. You have to know where you came from. You have to know who your ancestors were. You have to know what heritage they gave you. But you can't just say, oh, you know what? My grandfather and my grandmother were righteous. I've done my part in life because I come from a rich lineage. No, you have to be leaning forward mostly. You have to make for yourself your own life. You have to surge forth. That's where your focus should be. That's the Dalet. And the Dalet, again, represents this big idea of freedom. That's why you have the number 4 so often. To be leaning forward, yet remembering that your strength, your inspiration comes also from your connection to your roots. That's, according to Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, again, why the number 4 is so central. But speaking of the number 4, I just want to focus on another aspect of Magid, of telling the story. We have to tell the story to 4 sons. If you remember, 4 children. There are 4 children: the wise, the wicked, the innocent, and the one that does not know how to ask. Those are the 4 sons: Chacham, Rasha, Tam, and She'eno Yoda Lishol. Why these 4 sons? I think there's deep educational lessons in this. Educational lesson number 1 is because the Torah recognizes that no child is like the other. I have 9 children. I can promise you, none of my children are like the other. Every single human being is different. We have to recognize the difference in every human being. And in a way, Chanoch lanar al pi darko, again, as King Solomon tells us, educate the child according to his or her own way. If you try to make someone something else, someone else, then you have failed in education. That's number 1. Number 2, it also teaches us that God embraces all 4 sons, even the wicked. God includes all of them in the Haggadah. Don't give up on the wicked. Don't give up on a son of yours, a daughter of yours, because she's wicked. Everyone has room in the Passover story, in God's story. Therefore, everyone has to have room in our own story. Another lesson from the 4 sons I draw from our response to the wicked son. If you focus on that response, it's an astonishing response. What we say to the wicked son is, we will blunt your teeth. How dare you be so wicked and ask such a dumb question? A question of rebellion, really. Blunt, let us, haker chinav, let us blunt his teeth. What does that mean? Are we blunting his teeth? Are we encouraging boxing here on Passover? What does this mean? And the answer is much deeper than that. What are teeth? Teeth is what we see on the outside. Teeth is what enables our words to come from year to year. But again, it's that external surface of ours and of our words. Blunt your teeth, we tell the wicked, we tell ourselves that when the wicked is rebelling, don't look at his teeth, don't look at his external surface, don't look at the rebellion. Rebellion comes from somewhere much deeper. Maybe it comes from a yearning to connect. Maybe it comes from a yearning to be loved and to belong. Blunt those teeth. Go deep. Deep you'll find that special soul of the wicked. If you can erase those teeth and again connect to the inward aspect of the wicked, then he won't become wicked anymore. How true. I think I mentioned this last class, but really it's a TED talk that had a deep impact on me and my work with addicts. But there's a great TED talk that speaks of how many people think that the opposite of addiction is sobriety. And this man so wisely says, you are wrong. It's not sobriety. It is connection. People who fall into addictions is because they search for connection. That's what we try to tell people, yeah, with the Russia, with the wicked. Blunt those teeth and connect to them as they are deep within. That's the Russia. Okay, another thing that will make all of the ladies here very happy, but another thing during the Magid is that we lift our cup, a second cup of wine, and then we stand up and we sing the Vehi Sha'amda, many different tunes. Some say Vehi Sha'amda, Vehi Sha'amda, whatever it is. But that means she stood for us, for our ancestors and for us, because in each and every generation they tried to kill us, to murder us, and God saved us from their hands. But the question is, what is the she? And she stood for us. Who's she? And many commentaries, I think it was the Kli Yakar of Prague, Rabbi Allouche of the 16th century, says, who is she? The woman. The woman is the anchor of the home. She is what we call in Hebrew a keret habayit, the major part of the house. Thanks to her, our children were educated, our homes remained stable and alive. That's what saved us. We all have a lot to learn from the ladies in our lives. Vehi Sha'amda. That's why, by the way, during this part of the Seder, I encourage everyone to turn to the ladies and share with them what they may have learned from them. Vehi Sha'amda. She saved us. It's that lady, our mothers, our sisters, our own selves, if you're a lady, our daughters, whatever it may be. She saved us. Okay, that's just another insight into the Magid. Maybe one last insight into the Magid, and I'll continue on with the steps. One last insight into the Magid is maybe a favorite insight of mine. I think it's deeply true, and that is that one of the favorite songs of many people is the song of Dayenu. Everyone loves to sing Dayenu. Now, Dayenu basically means, and it would have been enough. We enumerate all of the miracles that God did for us, and we say, if you had just done this miracle, it would have been enough. That miracle, it would have been enough. But why are we singing that? And would it have been enough, really? I mean, if God had it's like one of the things we say, if God had taken us out of Egypt and not given us the Torah, it would have been enough? I don't know. We wouldn't have had a GPS to guide us as a nation of slaves. Would have that really been enough? What are we saying? But the answer, I think, speaks to the very root of happiness. In order to be happy, in order to be emotionally, spiritually free, one needs to be grateful. You cannot be happy without gratefulness. That's why I think the synonym of happiness is gratitude. Okay, going back to this idea to focus on the blessings even within the bitterness. Focus on the blessings even within the COVID-19 era. And that gratefulness will then engender happiness and true freedom. That's really why we sing the song, because Judaism understood long before Carl Jung and Freud and so many others that if you're not grateful, you cannot be happy. Okay, then we continue now with Motzi Matzah. After the Magid, we go to the Motzi Matzah, which is the part in which we wash our hands again for the matzah, for the mitzvah of the day to eat matzah. That's the mitzvah of the day. One should eat at least 3/4 of a shemura matzah, maybe 1.5 full machine matzahs to fulfill that mitzvah. Good luck afterwards. 2 and 3 hours after that, you'll start feeling the effects. But that matzah symbolizes what we actually already spoke about, this bread of humility. You cannot be growing, you cannot be free if you are not humble. They tell the story of this man who came to the great Hasidic Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and said, Rabbi, wherever I go, people are stepping all over me. And it hurts, and I'm in pain, and it's agonizing. And the Rebbe told him, well, maybe if you wouldn't stretch yourself everywhere, thinking that you're this sharp and you everywhere, then maybe people wouldn't be stepping over you wherever you go. The source of growth in life, of happiness in life, is this humility represented by the matzah. That's Motzi Matzah. Then Maror, we already spoke about, Maror and more. Korech then comes afterwards, which is the step in which we take the matzah, the charoset, and the bitterness, and we tie them all together, and we eat it as a sandwich, as was the custom by Hillel, which is what we mentioned during the Haggadah. What does this mean? Deeply, mystically, this means that what we are doing is that we are unifying the three types of people. There are sweet people like the charoset, there are dull people like the taste of the matzah, and then you also have bitter people like the marrow. Three types of people. What do we do on Passover? We unite them all because we understand that it's our duty to share again our divine vessel with the rest through Magid, through reaching out to each and every one of those types, uniting all of them together. There is no greater happiness than happiness that comes from unity. I have to tell you personally as a rabbi, and that's one of the things that really pain me the most during this COVID-19 era, what brings me the most nachas, the most pleasure, is to get together here each and every Shabbat morning and celebrate each and every one of you. Celebrate births, celebrate bar mitzvahs, celebrate weddings, and yes, even mourn together when there is a death and when there's a yahrzeit. There's nothing that engenders more happiness than uniting, even with those three different types of people, and then celebrating the story of freedom together. Korech. Then after Korech, there's the Shulchan Orech, where we finally have the meal. I have to share with you a quick anecdote by Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, which teaches us one of the great also lessons of life. But Rabbi Nachman of Breslev speaks of two beggars who dressed up as Jews on the day before Passover because they knew that Jews have a big feast on Passover, so they had heard, and they decided to dress up as Jews, go to the local synagogue, and then be invited by people to have that feast. Those dressed up Jews went to the synagogue. They got invited by two separate families. They made up to meet in the park afterwards. One went to his family, and at the beginning they give him just a cup of wine, then just karpas dipped in salt water. Then they speak for hours telling the story of Magid. Then they finally take out some matzah. And he's lost his patience. He said, that's not at all what I was expecting. He storms out of the house. Thank you for being such a good host. And leaves, goes and waits for his friend in the park. He's waiting and waiting and waiting. After 3 hours, his friend finally shows up. He says, where were you this whole time? They gave me just a cup of wine, some maror, and then just a piece of matzah. He said, his friend tells him, what took me so long? I'll tell you, you're so dumb. If you had waited just a little bit more, you would have had a whole Shulchan Orech, a whole meal served to you. Rabbi Nachman Breslev concludes that's a great lesson of life. Sometimes we become so impatient. Oh gosh, life is so terrible. But if we wait just a little bit more, then we'll know that there'll be a Shulchan Orech. And that's really what the Shulchan Orech represents, the state of royalty that we're in. It's a great meal served for us, to remind us that in essence, we are kings, we are queens, we are royal. That royalty has to be shared with everyone. It's the state of mind that you're in. You know, they say that elephants in a circus have chains attached to them because they are afraid that they might break away from those chains. But 1 second, they can. If they want to, they could. So how come they still have chains? And the answer is because as soon as they were born, they placed these chains on them. Then they weren't able to break away from those chains. They thought this would be they tried, but they couldn't. And then they grew up with this notion that they can never break away from those chains. So even when they're big and powerful enough to break away from those chains, they don't believe in themselves anymore. It's a state of mind of slavery. What do we do during Shulchan Orech? We say to ourselves, you know what? We are kings and queens. We may have forgotten that. We may have had all sorts of chains in life. But we have never forgotten our ability to break away from those chains to be truly kings and queens. That's Shulchan Orech. And then we have the Tzafun, the Afikoman, in which, again, the whole idea is to find the hidden, like we've spoken about. I know time is short. Then we have the part in which we go and open the door for Elijah the prophet. Now, by the way, this is why we also serve a whole cup for Elijah the prophet. This is the cup we use. You can use any other cup. Just before we go and open the door for him, we serve this cup of wine. And this comes to express our utter belief in God's ultimate redemption. Elijah the prophet will be announcing God's redemption. Again, after we've gone through all these steps, then we are ready for redemption. Those kings and queens are ready to be in their palace, to go to the Jerusalem temple and finally greet the Mashiach, meet the ultimate king. And therefore, we remind ourselves of that by pouring a cup for Elijah the prophet will announce the time of redemption. Now, I will say this, we open the door for Elijah the prophet, but as so many Hasidic rabbis have taught, we are not opening the door just for Elijah the prophet. We're opening the door for the Elijah the prophet within us. That belief in the ultimate redemption has to come alive. We can't just say, you know what, yes, this world and its troubles have prevailed. No, the redemption will eventually prevail. We open the door for this Elijah the prophet right here, not just for Elijah the prophet that comes from the heavens. The joke is we don't know in the COVID-19 era if we'll be able to hug him because he's been to many homes before our home, but we can mentally hug him and spiritually hug him, at least as we do each and every year. That's Elijah the prophet. Then we have Barech, Hallel, and Nirtzah, which we do Birkat Hamazon. Hallel, we praise Hashem with the Hallel, and Nirtzah, where we have all these lovely songs of Echad Miyodea, Echad Gadya, all these songs. But what they all have in common is not only the state of mind that is royal, but it is also the actual mouth of ours, the actual words, the actual actions of ours that are also royal. When we welcomed Elijah and when we had the Shulchan Aruch also, we were in the state of mind. Now it's time to translate the state of mind into words, Hallel, Nirtzah, into actions, where many of us dance, that's an action. Many of us take upon ourselves good resolutions to remain in that state of mind. Those resolutions are actions. It's not enough to have them up here, but we must have them here and in our actions also. I will conclude, and then I'll open this up to questions. I know the time is out, but I will conclude. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but I will send you my email just in case you want to send me your questions. I'm happy to answer them. I just have to run to a teen session, another Zoom call. But I will conclude just with the story of Elijah the prophet, having spoken about Elijah the prophet. Someone once came, one of my favorite Hasidic stories, someone once came to the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, and he said to him, I heard that if you fast for 40 days, you can meet Elijah the prophet. Is it true? He said to him, yes, it's true. The man fasted for 40 days and waited for Elijah the prophet. He did not see him. He came back to the Baal Shem Tov. He was very disappointed. I didn't see Elijah the prophet. He said, no, there's one more thing you have to do. Go, this Passover is coming up. Go and bring 9 boxes of food to this specific family in our village. They need it. He went, he brought 9 boxes of food, went back home, waited for Elijah the prophet to come, and he still did not come. Now, after a day or two, he's still waiting, hasn't come. He goes back to the Baal Shem Tov. He says, you lied to me. You said that Elijah the prophet would come. I did everything you wanted me to do. 40 days of fasting, brought 9 boxes of food to this poor family. It still hasn't come. I haven't seen him. Baal Shem Tov says, no, now you have to wait 2 more days. And then go back to that poor family, but don't bring them anything. This time, just stand outside, go by the window, and listen to the conversations of the home. Then you'll see Elijah the prophet. The man says, fine. He goes to this family after 2 days, stands outside by the window, and listens to an astounding conversation. In that conversation, the young boy of the house was telling his mother, mother, please don't cry. I hear you cry. Why are you crying? And the mother says, crying because all the food that this angel brought to us a few days ago is gone. I don't know what to do. And the boy responded to his mother, Mommy, you don't have to cry. Just like Elijah the prophet came to us a few days ago to bring us 9 boxes of food, I'm sure he'll come again. And the man then understood, Elijah the prophet is me. That's the way I'm referred to in this home. That's who I ought to meet. That's what the Baal Shem Tov was saying. On Passover, my friends, we are elevating ourselves not just to freedom, not just to this royal state of mind and of action, but to the state of Elijah the prophet himself. That's why we open the door for this Elijah the prophet. That's what we are doing. That's what all these steps towards freedom enable us to do. So really, I bless each and every one of us that we really should become Elijah the prophets this Passover, each in our own way, whether we identify as one of the four sons or another type of four sons, it doesn't matter. You can be an Elijah the prophet by your actions of Elijah the prophet, by your words of Elijah the prophet, by your perspective on life as the perspective of Elijah the prophet. And then no doubt, if we each become Elijah the prophets, then Elijah the prophet himself from heaven will then come and announce the coming of Mashiach. May it happen even before Passover. Thank you all. Chag Sameach. Please send me your questions. I'm sorry I didn't have time for them. Thank you, Janet.
Yes, Rabbi, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Ah.
Thank you.